What kind of person smashes a car's mirror in broad daylight and thinks they'll walk away scot-free? The Publix parking lot was a sweltering maze of glinting hoods and impatient shoppers when Karen stormed out of the store, her cart rattling with overfilled bags. Her face was a storm cloud, lips pursed in a permanent scowl, her oversized sunglasses sliding down her nose. She was the kind of woman who radiated entitlement, her voice a sharp blade slicing through the humid Florida air. "Move this overpriced toy," she bellowed, glaring at a sleek red Ferrari parked across two spaces. Its polished curves gleamed under the noon sun, a stark contrast to her faded yoga pants and sweat-stained tank top. She didn't care who heard her. Karen never did. The Ferrari's owner, a man named Marcus, was inside the store, oblivious to the brewing chaos. He'd parked carefully, knowing his car drew attention, both admiration and envy. Karen, however, saw it as an insult, a personal affront that someone dared take up her parking space. She didn't hesitate. With a grunt, she swung her cart hard, the metal edge slamming into the Ferrari's side mirror. The crack echoed like a gunshot, shards of glass scattering across the asphalt. A young woman nearby, Emily, froze mid-step, her phone halfway to her ear. "Did she just?" she whispered to no one, her eyes wide. Karen didn't flinch. She shoved her cart forward, muttering about rich jerks and stupid cars, as if the world owed her an apology. Emily, a college student working part-time at Publix, couldn't believe what she'd seen. She'd dealt with difficult customers before. Her manager called them Karens, with a weary sigh, but this was next level. Her heart raced as she fumbled for her phone, not to call anyone yet, but to record. Something told her this wasn't over. Karen, oblivious to the growing attention, yanked open her minivan's door and started tossing her groceries inside. A security guard, Jamal, was already crossing the lot, his radio crackling. He'd been alerted by another shopper who'd seen the whole thing. "Ma'am," he called, his voice firm but calm. "Step away from the vehicle." Karen whipped around, her face twisting into a sneer. "Don't you ma'am me," she snapped. "I didn't do anything wrong." The air thickened with tension. Jamal, a broad-shouldered man with a no-nonsense demeanor, stood his ground. "You damaged that car," he said, pointing to the Ferrari's shattered mirror. "We have cameras and witnesses." Karen's eyes darted to Emily, who was now filming, her hands trembling but her resolve steady. "You little brat," Karen hissed, taking a step toward Emily. "Stop recording me." Emily stumbled back, her heart pounding, but she kept her phone steady. Jamal stepped between them, his voice rising. "Back off, ma'am. Now." Karen's face flushed red, her fists clenching. She wasn't used to being challenged, let alone by a security guard and a nobody kid. The crowd was growing, shoppers pausing, whispering, staring. Karen felt the weight of their judgment, and it only fueled her rage. Inside the store, Marcus was at the checkout, chatting with the cashier about his weekend plans. He was a tech entrepreneur, mid-30s, with a quiet confidence that came from years of hard work. The Ferrari was his one indulgence, a symbol of everything he'd built from nothing. When his phone buzzed with a text from a friend in the lot, "Some lady just smashed your car," his stomach dropped. He abandoned his cart and sprinted outside, his polished shoes slapping against the tile. The scene he found was a powder keg. Karen, red-faced and shouting, Jamal trying to de-escalate, Emily, still recording, and a handful of onlookers murmuring in shock. The Ferrari's mirror dangled by a wire, its once pristine surface a jagged ruin. Marcus's jaw tightened, his voice low but lethal. "What the hell did you do to my car?" Karen spun toward him, undeterred. "Your car? Maybe you shouldn't park like an idiot, taking up 2 spaces." Her voice dripped with venom, as if Marcus had personally wronged her by existing. He blinked, stunned by her audacity. "You think that justifies this?" He shot back, gesturing to the damage. "You're paying for this, lady." Karen laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that made Emily flinch. "Pay? For your tacky little toy? Good luck with that." She turned back to her minivan, as if she could just drive away. Jamal blocked her path, his radio now buzzing with the news that police were on their way. Karen's confidence faltered for a split second, but she doubled down, her voice rising to a shriek. "You can't hold me here. I know my rights." The twist came like a gut punch. Emily, still filming, zoomed in on Karen's minivan. Tucked in the back seat, barely visible through the tinted window, was a child's car seat. A little girl, no older than 5, sat there, her wide eyes peering out at the chaos. She looked scared, her small hands clutching a stuffed bear. Emily's heart sank. This wasn't just about a broken mirror anymore. Karen wasn't just a loudmouth throwing a tantrum, she was a mother, dragging her daughter into this mess. The crowd hadn't noticed the girl yet, but Emily did, and it changed everything. She lowered her phone slightly, torn between exposing Karen's behavior and protecting the child's privacy. "Ma'am," Emily said softly, her voice shaking, "your daughter's watching." Karen froze, her eyes flicking to the van. For the first time, shame flickered across her face, but it was fleeting. She straightened, defiant again. "Mind your own business," she spat, but her voice cracked. Marcus, still seething, caught sight of the little girl too. His anger wavered, replaced by a pang of sympathy. He'd grown up with a mother who lashed out like Karen, leaving scars that weren't visible. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Look," he said, his voice softer now, "we can work this out, but you need to take responsibility." Karen scoffed, but the fight in her was waning. The crowd was closing in, phones out, whispers turning to murmurs of disapproval. Jamal's radio crackled again. Police were minutes away. Karen's bravado was crumbling, but she wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. The standoff in the Publix parking lot was a pressure cooker, the heat amplifying every shout, every glance. Karen's defiance was a cracked dam, holding back a flood of consequences she couldn't outrun. She stood by her minivan, her arms crossed, her face a mask of indignation, but her eyes betrayed her, darting nervously toward the sound of approaching sirens. Marcus, the Ferrari's owner, kept his distance, his hands clenched into fists. He wasn't just angry about the mirror anymore. It was the principle. People like Karen, he thought, never faced the fallout of their actions. Not today. Not if he could help it. Jamal, the security guard, was a rock in the storm, his voice steady as he repeated, "Ma'am, stay where you are." Karen ignored him, rummaging in her purse as if she could magic her way out of this. "This is harassment," she yelled, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "I'm a paying customer. You can't treat me like this." The onlookers exchanged glances, some amused, some disgusted. Emily, still holding her phone, felt a knot in her stomach. The little girl in the minivan was watching, her small face pressed against the window. Emily wanted to stop recording, to shield the child from the spectacle, but she couldn't. This was evidence, and Karen wasn't backing down. The twist deepened as Emily noticed something else. Karen's purse had spilled open, and among the scattered receipts and lipsticks was a badge. A teacher's ID from a local elementary school. Karen wasn't just a mother, she was someone entrusted with kids, someone who shaped young minds. The irony hit Emily like a slap. How could someone so reckless, so cruel, be a teacher? She hesitated, then zoomed in on the badge, capturing the name and school logo. It felt wrong, invasive, but Karen's behavior demanded accountability. Emily's hands shook as she whispered to Jamal, "She's a teacher." His eyes widened, but he kept his focus on Karen, who was now shouting into her phone, demanding to speak to the store manager. Marcus overheard Emily's whisper and felt a fresh wave of disgust. A teacher? He thought of his own childhood, of teachers who'd been lifelines, and others who'd been bullies in disguise. He stepped closer, his voice cutting through Karen's tirade. "You're a teacher?" he asked, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "And you think this is okay? Smashing property, yelling at everyone, scaring your own kid." Karen's head snapped toward him, her face paling. "Don't you dare bring my daughter into this," she hissed, but her voice was losing its edge. The crowd murmured, their judgment now tinged with shock. A teacher. The word hung in the air, heavy with implications. The sirens were closer now, their wail slicing through the tension. Karen's bravado was unraveling, her hands trembling as she shoved her phone back into her purse. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, but it was more to herself than anyone else. She glanced at her minivan, at her daughter's frightened face, and for a moment, her mask slipped. She looked human-flawed, cornered, scared. But the moment passed, and she straightened, her voice rising again. "I'm leaving," she declared, reaching for her car door. Jamal was faster, stepping in front of her. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The crowd held its breath, sensing the climax approaching. 2 police officers arrived, their cruiser pulling into the lot with a screech. The first, Officer Rivera, was a woman with a calm but commanding presence. Her partner, Officer Chun, was younger, his eyes scanning the scene with quiet intensity. "What's going on here?" Rivera asked, her gaze moving from Jamal to Karen to the shattered Ferrari mirror. Jamal explained quickly, pointing to the security cameras and Emily's phone. Karen interrupted, her voice shrill. "This is a misunderstanding. I didn't do anything wrong. That car was parked illegally." Rivera raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Ma'am, step over here," she said, gesturing to the side. Karen hesitated, then complied, her defiance crumbling under the weight of authority. Marcus stepped forward, his anger tempered by exhaustion. He explained the damage, his voice steady but laced with frustration. "I just want her to take responsibility," he said. "This isn't about the money, it's about right and wrong." Rivera nodded, jotting notes as Chun inspected the Ferrari. Emily, still filming, felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't expected things to escalate this far, but Karen's lies were piling up, each one more desperate than the last. "I barely touched it," Karen insisted, her voice cracking. "This is a setup." The officers exchanged a glance, then asked Emily to show them her footage. She hesitated, glancing at the little girl in the van, but handed over her phone. The video was clear. Karen's cart slamming into the mirror, her unapologetic swagger, her threats to Emily. The crowd watched in silence as the officers reviewed it, their faces unreadable. Karen's world was collapsing, and she knew it. Her lies weren't holding up, not with witnesses, cameras, and now police scrutiny. She tried one last defense, her voice softer, almost pleading. "I'm a single mom," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm under a lot of stress. I didn't mean to cause trouble." The words might have worked in another context, but here they rang hollow. Marcus shook his head, his sympathy long gone. Emily felt a lump in her throat, thinking of the little girl watching her mother unravel. The officers weren't swayed either. "Ma'am, you're coming with us," Rivera said, her tone firm but not unkind. "We need to sort this out at the station." As Karen was led to the cruiser, her hands cuffed behind her, the crowd began to disperse. Some whispered in satisfaction, others in pity. Emily stopped recording, her hands shaking. She looked at the minivan, where the little girl was now crying, her face buried in her stuffed bear. Jamal noticed too and radioed for a social worker to ensure the child was cared for. Marcus stood by his Ferrari, the broken mirror a stark reminder of the day's chaos. He felt no triumph, only a hollow sense of justice. Karen's actions had consequences, but the cost was more than just a mirror. It was a child's trust, a community's faith, a teacher's reputation. The parking lot felt emptier as the cruiser pulled away, Karen's head bowed in the back seat. The Publix parking lot was quiet now, the crowd gone, the sirens faded. The shattered Ferrari mirror lay in pieces on the asphalt, glinting like broken promises under the fading sun. Marcus stood by his car, his anger replaced by a heavy weariness. He'd won. In a way, Karen was gone, detained by police, facing charges for vandalism and disorderly conduct. But the victory felt empty. He kept seeing the little girl in the minivan, her tear-streaked face as a social worker gently coaxed her out. That image lingered, a reminder that actions ripple far beyond their intent. Emily sat on a nearby curb, her phone heavy in her hands. She'd uploaded the video to the police but hadn't posted it online, despite the temptation. The internet would have eaten Karen alive, another Karen meme to fuel the outrage cycle. But Emily couldn't do it. Not with that little girl in the picture. She thought of her own mother, flawed but trying, and wondered what Karen's daughter would carry from this day. Jamal joined her, his security vest unbuttoned, his face etched with exhaustion. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice low. "Not easy, but right." Emily nodded, but the weight of it all pressed on her chest. She'd exposed Karen, but at what cost? At the police station, Karen sat in a holding room, her bravado gone. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on her face. She'd called her sister to pick up her daughter, her voice breaking as she explained. The reality of her actions was sinking in. A criminal charge, a damaged reputation, and worst of all, the look in her daughter's eyes. Karen had always justified her outbursts. Life was hard. People were unfair. She was just standing up for herself. But now, alone in that sterile room, she saw herself through others' eyes. Reckless, cruel, unaccountable. The teacher's badge in her purse felt like a mockery. She'd spent years telling kids to own their mistakes. Yet here she was, dodging her own. Marcus drove his Ferrari to a repair shop the next day, the broken mirror a nagging reminder. The mechanic whistled at the damage, quoting a price that made Marcus wince. But it wasn't about the money. He kept thinking about Karen's daughter, about how cycles of anger and entitlement could pass down like heirlooms. He'd broken that cycle in his own life, clawing his way out of a tough childhood to build something better. Maybe, he thought, there was a way to break it for someone else. He made a call to his lawyer, not to press harder charges, but to ask about restorative justice programs. Maybe Karen could learn something. Maybe her daughter could see a different path. Emily went back to work at Publix, but the parking lot felt different now. Customers whispered about the Ferrari incident, some casting her curious glances. Her manager praised her courage, but Emily didn't feel brave. She felt like she'd stumbled into a storm and barely made it out. Late that night, she wrote a blog post not about Karen, but about accountability. She wrote about how easy it is to judge, to point fingers, but how hard it is to face your own flaws. We all have a Karen inside us, she typed, her fingers trembling. The question is whether we let her win. She didn't mention the little girl, but her words were for Hera hope that she'd grow up stronger than her mother's mistakes. Karen faced her day in court a month later. The judge was stern but fair, ordering her to pay for the Ferrari's repair and complete community service. Her teaching job was on thin ice. Her school had seen Emily's video, which had leaked despite her restraint. Karen's colleagues were divided. Some saw her as a cautionary tale, others as a product of a system that burned out its educators. Karen herself was silent as she left the courtroom, her sister at her side. She'd started therapy, a small step toward change. It wasn't enough to erase the damage, but it was a start. She thought of her daughter every day, vowing to be better, even if the road was long. The Publix parking lot returned to its rhythm, carts rattling, shoppers hurrying, life moving on. But for those who'd been there, the memory lingered. Marcus drove a little more carefully now, parking in single spaces, checking his mirrors twice. Emily kept her phone in her pocket, choosing her battles with care. Jamal got a promotion, his calm under pressure noted by the store's higher-ups. And somewhere, a little girl hugged her stuffed bear, her world a little shakier but not yet broken. The Ferrari's mirror was fixed, but the cracks in Karen's life would take longer to mend. The story didn't end with a tidy bow. Life rarely does, but it left behind a quiet lesson. Actions have weight, and redemption is possible, but only if you face the truth. Karen's outburst had been a spark, igniting a chain of choices, hers, Marcus's, Emily's, that rippled outward. In the end, it wasn't about the Ferrari or the mirror. It was about the people, their flaws, their fights, and the small, stubborn hope that they could be better tomorrow than they were today.